back, and we're starting our first conversation this morning looking at some of the laws that do exist in terms of protecting our children in Belize. And of course, this is all a part of a wider conversation in being able to help us all process through the trauma that we feel from hearing or seeing the stories about the recent tragedy. And we have with us on set Fermin Oliveira. Fermin is a social work lecturer. He, at one time, was the executive director for the community rehabilitation... Director, sorry. For the Community Rehabilitation Department, and he also does some research on some of the social issues that we see in Belize. Good morning, Fermin.
Good morning, Marlene, Gavin. It's good to be here.
And thank you for coming in and helping us to process, because that's ideally what we want to do. I want to start off by just asking your initial thoughts on what we know so far about the incident that took place on Friday.
Yeah. Well, one was kind of like disbelief. I tend to not be connected on social media otherwise during the weekend, but the story was overwhelming. That by word of mouth, they say, "Have you heard?" And then when we look into the matter, and it was sad to be honest with you, devastating how children can be subjected to this type of cruelty, and it's not anything necessarily new that that completely overwhelmed me. I think the shock was really how did we, and I say collective we as a society, allow this to go that far. That was what was devastating, I think.
From a community perspective, I see how that's your first thought, and I think because you are community oriented, but for I think the wider public, that's not usually the first thought we have. What did we do? It's a blame game. It's what did she do? What did he do? What did they do? Or what they didn't do?
Right. Marlene, I have this colleague, and I respect her very, very much, and she would say something like, when we can't solve the big things, we scramble to try to address the little things, and blaming is usually often one of those little things contextually, because we are confused, we are overwhelmed, we want to blame, and usually we want to blame the mother or some woman. It's always the woman's fault, even the fault of man, so to speak. And of course, I'm joking. But this is not a joke. We want to blame, and maybe there is some room for that. But I think the wider discussion needs to be focused around how do we prevent these things from happening? How did it slip through the cracks throughout? Let me just tell you my experience with working with children in conflict with the law. I would see them at that point when they have committed offenses. But as a very young, untrained, just a regular person trying to do good, I recognized one thing that was common in the stories of these young children, boys and girls, a history of neglect and abuse that was unchecked, for the most part. And then they would come into care when they had committed offenses. But the history was abuse and neglect in their lives. So it was a concern. Weebach has always been, one of those things that I think about. And systems fail. And when I say systems fail, I'm not just talking about the formal, the response system, but society, the communities, the neighborhoods. And of course there are explanations to these things, but nonetheless the end result is tragic for the victims.
And of course, going back to what you were talking about community, I think naturally, especially if you are in a community that, where something like this has happened, one of the first things that naturally comes to mind is, what could I have done? Or did I miss signs? Did I do something? So in terms of where do we begin, I guess, when we're talking about looking out for a child in our, who may be related to us or just in our community?
Well, outside of the legal stuff, which I think we can touch a little bit later, but what can we do? Let me tell you what the data shows, the research that I've read as it relates to reporting these type of things. And some of the data that I was really keen about was among social workers who in many jurisdictions have a legal obligation meaning they must report. There was a clear hesitation among practicing social workers to report incidents of child sexual abuse specifically. We can talk about that a little bit later on, but I just want to tell you that even those who are trained and know that they should report, there is a serious hesitation.
But what would be the cause of that hesitation? Social work in theory and in training it's based on being able to assist in the protection of children.
Right. So before I answer the why we believe and why the explanations that are out there, I want to point out that there is a real hesitation among people to report these things.
Yes.
And in an extreme case, even among social workers. Specifically as it relates to child sexual abuse. The data is telling us that given the esteem of the perpetrator, if the person is a teacher, a principal, a pastor, or a minister, some affluent person, that hesitation increases. So we start to doubt our best guess in disbelief that some people that we hold in high esteem are in fact capable and are committing these offenses. So that's high on the radar here. Who you are may influence my belief as to have you done this or not. So that is one of those things. Then there is the retribution impact. The idea that people in high places, high powerful, wealthy people can come after me to discredit me as being the one that should champion, as the one championing the cause for this. So those are two, the person, the affluence of the person, fear of retribution by the powers that be. Sometimes, let us make no mistakes, in these kinds of situations, forces are actively attempting to sabotage, to discredit our children. Many times some of these things go addressed in a very corrupt way of intimidation and paying our victims and their parents.
And I think if we could just perhaps put this in on the list of things that we want to get to, we can also talk about the court system, because that makes it harder, because the child at whatever age also has the burden of being able to provide that proof, in addition to social workers and medical care system. But going back to it, because you said that the hesitation is in reporting sexual abuse. What I'm interested in is even in physical abuse, because I hear stories all the time. Oh, well, my neighbor like whop up it pick me. And I would ask, did you report it? And many times, in fact, all cases, I've heard no, because there's I don't want to get involved in that. Some people still beat, I may not, but they still do it.
Right.
And the issue really is that there may be that one time that it goes too far.
Well, Marlene, the truth is that the cultural context, and let us make no mistake, we live in a very violent, punitive, a hurtful society, and we inflict the most vulnerable with a certain measure of punishment and so on. They say if lashing kids and really abusing kids. I am not talking about the need to discipline children. I understand that. I raised 3 kids of my own. All my life I've worked with kids. I recognize the importance of disciplining. That's not the same as abuse. We need to be crystal clear about those things, about that difference. But if the abuse is pervasive, meaning if it's rampant in our society, we tend to start to normalize that behavior. Maybe we have a culture of abusing our kids. Then it's normal. We don't see it as anything. We say, well, that's a parent's right to lash, and we might call it disciplining their children, when in fact what we're doing is abuse. So the cultural context is important. If we have seen, if we have suffered, if we have experienced, then it might just become normal that we accept and condone this behavior. I recall when there was a move to remove corporal punishment, and I don't know if you remember, might have been too young to, that uphill battle. Yeah. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah. And when it was taken out of schools, in fact, the appeasement was that only the principal would have could be able to beat.
And we, you know what, our children in need of disciplining, well, that has always been a big, raising children is a difficult job. I must say it's a difficult job. So why do neighbors and people don't report? One, it's a hands-off, could be, maybe they don't want to seem to be interfering in, the business of other people. Maybe it's culturally accepted. Maybe we think that it is okay. And yes, abuse and neglect, for anybody that's hearing me, will really hurt that child more than help that child.
Let me delve just a bit there, because there's also an underlying fear, and we hear it all the time. I hear it from the younger people now, me no want to be a snitch. And it also is, the adults don't use the same language, but there is a fear of being a whistleblower, of being someone who stands up for, based on our knowledge and our perspectives, what is right. So if I know that the sound of that child being beaten just sounds excessive, like that's not a clap, and it's not, and I don't condone either, but you could hear that the child is in pain, and I don't report it. A part of it sometimes is, well, I don't want the neighbor know that it's in business,
Right.
and then they know that I do that. So we stop ourselves from being the person who would, like we would hope somebody else would.
Right.
But I don't want to do it.
Well, let me just tell you all and the public that there is protection. Legal, I mean, the paper, the law provides protection for people that do report. Where, let us say it was a false alarm, or that in good faith and goodwill, nobody will bring charges against you. And really the response system itself, meaning either the social work department or social services or the police, should never divulge or reveal who made that report.
Okay.
So there are those protections, but that maybe isn't sufficient to convince John public that maybe if I report, this is confidential. Mm-hmm. So if that fear is very real, and it does exist, and let me tell you, there is a lot of concern in the integrity of the responding system. In my practice, and I'm very proud of this as it relates to the persons that I've worked with, I've never known about a case where social workers would reveal. No, I'm not saying it hasn't happened. I'm just saying that I have never heard where they say, oh, Marlene reported, she's the one.
Yeah.
And I think that's great, and I think that's what we need to be supported and to be proud of, that the confidentiality of the reporter needs to be kept exactly confidential. It's privileged information. So to offer some protection to the person really attempting to protect the victim, in this case, children.
Yeah, well, that kind of preempts what was going to be my next question, which was really what is, for somebody who is in that position, whether it is, could be a social worker or it could just be somebody in the community. Given that, there even people do have these fears of, let's say, retribution or whatever, but what is the best case scenario, you spoke about, the protections that ought to be in place for the person who's reporting, but also for the child. If there is a case of abuse, and I do take it upon myself to call the authorities, what can I hope for? What
You mean you as a reporter?
As a reporter, yeah. How would the child...
Well, you know what, your involvement would kind of end there. Where you report, you suspect this, and then an investigator or somebody who is doing that investigation, that should happen. It's not like you will be dragged to court to give testimony or witnesses or things like that to be a witness. That would be the extent of your job. I think it's minimal and it's great. So that it gives the persons that are reporting minimal input. Can some of this be done maliciously? Maybe it has, but then again, you will still be protected because the intent, the thinking is, you know what, you're doing this in good faith, so we won't bring charges against you.
And even if you're wrong,
even if you're wrong,
it's better to be wrong than to know you're right and not have done anything.
Well, Marlene, when it comes to children or vulnerable populations, which is always a concern for us, children are there. It's better to, somebody would say, to err on the side of caution than to just allow that to happen. So, but that is one of those things, that why aren't we catching some of these things? And you know what? Go ahead, Marlene. You wanted
No,
to?
because I wanted to follow. I think Gavin really introduced something important in terms of what it feels like to be the reporter in terms of reporting abuse. So you make the call, you finally decide, and you can actually do it to Crime Stoppers too with their app. Like you can
That's
send
right.
tips anonymously there. And so I send this tip. Maybe I even see there's some investigation going on. But what happens is we don't understand the process as people who are not involved. So I still see the child there, and that just makes me give up hope. Like they did nothing. I called social, they did nothing.
Well, you know, it's hard to, when you don't know especially what is happening, having experienced that work environment, I must tell you that these people are a fairly decent job at responding. Actually, I think the criticism has been all that social does is to move kids, which sometimes it can look that way. But when they move children, I think there is sufficient substance to support that move. It's always a traumatic and hard thing to do, but you're rescuing, you're saving, you're protecting that child. And even when it hurts, that is what needs to happen. So I think there has been a fair level of criticism in that respect. That all they do is to move kids. But after, well, my experience has been when they move is to protect children. Protect children takes serious energies and strength, you know, and almost going against the odds. The people here, even the children you're saving many times and protecting, want to be with. You know, so for example, I would tell students, you know, you don't go against your best, just follow the rules.
Yeah.
Report it, take action. The reward might come many years later, if anything. Sometimes you may never see it.
Yeah.
But to protect children takes energy, takes a serious conviction.
It's a tiered approach, though.
It's
in
a
fact,
tiered
the
approach.
first incident wouldn't necessarily lead
No,
to
no,
the
no.
child being removed.
No, the law gives you definition. They're a bit broad, but it's to safeguard. You know, they would say if this child is suffering harm or likely to suffer harm. So it's a I wouldn't say it's a guesstimate, but it's a judgment decision, and that judgment must be taken very seriously, and you will act on that judgment.
Yeah.
You know, but let us be very real. The situation of our children, and I don't want to, you know, maybe what do I see? I see lots of neglect still. I mean, tons of neglect. You see kids wandering late, begging by the stores, and you know, you see neglect. So you get hardened, you get used to this. You think, well, nothing is happening. And you know what? There is an effect. There is an impact. And, you know, we'll be seeing these as time comes along. But our insensitivity to the condition of children can be so low that unless we see that child dying, then, oh my God, maybe we need to do something. And that needs to be reversed.
Wow.
That needs to be reversed. You know, that children need to be protected. You know,
That's a critical statement that you just said, that we are now only reacting at the point of extreme harm or death, rather than some of the basics.
Well, you know, there is a discussion, and this is kind of like on the side of more class time. You know, it's 100 and something days. You know, I often think about this, do we need more class time? I mean, honestly, I critically think about the realities of what I see working within this primary school system, as an example. Do we need more class time? I'll be honest with you, and I would shoulder that criticism that comes. Children need not necessarily more class time. Children need more opportunities to recreate, to develop their skills in music, in arts, in play, in games, in competition. Forget class time. We do too much of that. And what are the results? We can't show meaningful, tangible improvements. My guess is if you have class in music and that the kids are doing more exercise and walking and these kinds of things, we will see way better reaction in early childhood education, including primary school, I'm thinking about, than just having kids completely corralled in these terrible classroom situations where they're overcrowded, where the teachers are burnt out. You know, we don't need more teachers, we need more PE teachers, we need more recreational people. That's really what we need. How you combat trauma and neglect is offering those opportunities in another area for that child to develop. Yeah. Music, art, painting, sports, recreation, that's where we need to go.
And especially those types of needs, a lot of the time can't be met at home. You know?
You're right. They can't be met at home many times. So we need to rethink. And it's not like, I mean, if with a little research, you would see that, well, Freeman is not talking craziness. But we haven't improved our math scores more. We haven't improved anything. What we have improved is in more violence and more crime. And regardless of, you know, we fighting if one number. So listen, we need to be very clear that we are living in a very violent society. And the young people are delivering it and also receiving it. So something really radical needs to take place. Look at
Has
health.
there been anything radical of recent? This is where I mean, let's be honest, the changing with the corporal punishment within classrooms, that was radical. The adjustments to the criminal code to really strengthen and also clarify and provide for equality.
Absolutely.
Those were also really big steps.
Absolutely.
But in terms of looking at what we are doing for children in Belize, in being able to not just ensure that they're vaccinated or definitely enrollment in school is important, but to better their lives, because we know, and we'll probably get by the end of this year, the new poverty indicators, but at one point a little less than half. I think that we know that some parents are struggling. I mean, single parents are working as hard as they can, sometimes just if they can get childcare access, they do. If not, the oldest child takes care of them. So we know that the situation for many, it's desperate.
It is desperate. You know, it is, like I said, you know, the culture. Of course, there's a culture of poverty. I mean, let me tell you, I come from up north. I come from Corozal, where we take great pride in taking care of our yards, and in the front of our yards, next to the drain, we clean that. People here, their houses in some areas are being covered by it, but they expect maybe city council to do that. The culture. Then you get immersed into another culture, and suddenly your lenses start to change. You start to, you know, you stop seeing the trash that's all around. You don't see the need to have it moved. You know,
because it's not my job.
Well, exactly. So, you know, I don't want to sound cynical about things, but we need to keep check and keep stock. You know, and we get to use the things that are detrimental and that are not progressive, and we accept that as a new reality, including abuse. If a child starts to grow up, he thinks this is right, he thinks this is it, and this is what you dish out. You know, and you know, you can talk to teachers about this, but the climate in your regular classroom, in your regular schools, man, that's serious. You know, that's another conversation.
Even if you talk to teachers about the approach of some parents, I mean, they're constantly under threat as well. But looking at the issue of, because there's shared responsibility here. I guess that's what I wanted to get at. A lot of times we look at a child who perhaps went through something as terrible as what we saw on Friday. But every day, the social workers are inundated with going into homes and seeing terrible conditions, whether it's neglect, whether it's some sort of malnourishment a child may feel. Maybe they're not necessarily encouraged to go to school. There's so many things that are absolutely terrible for children that are experienced every day. But the blame game that happens, it's social work's fault, it's a parent's fault, it's a teacher's fault, it's a school's fault, it's a church's fault, it's a police's fault, and we can't seem to get a sense of what our roles are. And when someone fails, whoever that is, we're just trying to point a finger.
Yeah, you know, to be honest with you, you know, we have evolved into a very individualistic society. We have changed the ways of. It's when I think about it, it's like we are forgetting as society develops of how to be human beings, caring and loving and affecting. It's about me. It's about very individualistic. It's about materialism. Our society has changed. Make no mistake. You know, one day we will long, you know, right now we have long distance education and we can have classrooms that's one day the premier education will be where there is a lecturer in the classroom, where they know you by name, by a face. It's not a number, it's not just, you know, everything is almost virtual. It's like that human connectiveness is being gradually eroded. You see, that's how I see it. We don't have to be like other societies, I don't think. I think we have a unique history, but our base, what makes us unique, you know, it's caring. That's what, you know, caring for each other. You know, in a very individualistic society, when you see that person there that was shot or killed, or, well, that's not my child. Yeah. That's somebody else's, as long as they don't come home. You see, in other more progressive societies, that's a crime against all of us. Mm-hmm. And we demand that gets solved, and we demand answers. But we are not there. Our structure of governance is one really that puts us to combat against ourselves, rather than they really being there to develop, to help, to see human development, to see human progress. You know, so there is blame all around, including the fact that the people that really abuse their kids are those in the home. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Make no mistake. Statistically for donkey years, and the primary ones that abuse kids are women. Mm-hmm. That is not to say that women are bad. It's just that 95% of persons providing childcare are women still. Mm-hmm. So they're at the forefront, they're at the brunt of dealing with the stresses and pressures of child rearing, and often in difficult circumstances. So they err or they're overwhelmed, and they do abuse their children.
Abuse in what sense? Because people hear abuse and they think sexual abuse, but that's not the numbers you're talking about.
Right. Yeah. All, you know, except for sexual abuse probably, because we need to be crystal clear that the primary sexual abusers are heterosexual males. And we don't need to.
Can you say that again? You mean men who are not gay?
Straight men, traditionally, statistically, are the overwhelming majority of sexual abusers and those who commit sexual crimes against children and women or girls, you know.
So with that clarified, when you say that women are the main perpetrator of abuse, what do you mean? Are you talking about neglect?
Physical neglect, those kinds of things, yeah. And remember, this is not to say, oh my God, women are bad or single. No. It's just that they are in contact with doing that child care, so they naturally, the numbers are overwhelming, right. But it speaks to this point, and that's why I was saying this support that women need. That's where we need to. What is the support? Child care, you know, family planning, you know, education, you know, and I think in some areas they're doing well, but we must
giving them jobs,
big time.
Yeah. And this is such a there's an article I read. It was exactly this point. If you want to help children, help the parents.
Absolutely, 100%.
If you see a child who's suffering and you don't like the circumstances, help the parents.
That's
because the backpack, the meal, all of those are great to help with short-term needs, but the parents need to provide for them.
Right.
So we have a lot more to discuss. What we'll actually do is take a very quick pause. We got to get into some of the laws as well. There are laws that regulate who should be reporting child abuse, who must report child abuse, and the consequences there. But we'll actually pause, and we'll include Jenny Lovell in the conversation to bring in some of the psychological aspects as well. So we're going to go ahead and take a break. We'll be back in a few.